What's up everyone, welcome to the Commander Theorem. I'm your host Paul, and we're here today to help you dive into the Commander format. Building your first Commander deck can be a daunting task. With so many cards to choose from, it can be intimidating to find the perfect 99. We're here to help you refine your craft, so sit back, relax, and let's explore a Grixis Commander today. Before we begin, remember to like this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to stay up to date with all the happenings over here. You can also check our Patreon if you'd like to support us directly, and we have playmats available over at Inked Gaming. Without further ado, let's dive right in. Meet Nicol Bolas the Ravager, a 4/4 Elder Dragon for 1 of any color, and then a mana each of black, red, and blue. Dominaria's most ancient evil, Nicol Bolas has been the primary antagonist of the Magic storyline for almost a decade, taking a temporary backseat to the likes of the Phyrexians and the Eldrazi Titans, but now he's at the forefront of the Magic story. A master of black, blue, and red magic, he is by far the oldest and perhaps most powerful of the Planeswalkers, being tremendously more powerful than any of the Gatewatch squad. This incarnation of Nicol Bolas is a unique commander in that he starts as a legendary creature, but for 4 mana of any color, and then a mana each of red, black, and blue, he can flip into Nicol Bolas the Arisen, a powerful planeswalker with 4 deadly abilities. But let's start off with his creature side. When he enters the battlefield, each opponent must discard a card. This ability is going to be a rather large theme within our deck, and is a very powerful control element that we can take advantage of. The Planeswalker side, as with many Planeswalkers, is often met with much vinegar. He starts off as a staggering 7 loyalty walker. You can then +2 him to draw 2 cards. You can -3 him to deal 10 damage to target Planeswalker or creature. You can -4 him to put target creature or Planeswalker card from a graveyard onto your battlefield. Finally, you can -12 him to exile all but the bottom card of target opponent's library. These 4 abilities lean very much to a control style deck, slowly draining your opponents of their ability to play their cards and whittling them down into nothing. The build we will be exploring today will deal with some discard shenanigans, taking advantage of some discard spells and punishing enchantments that'll put opponents onto the defensive, but we'll also be utilizing a dragon tribal strategy that will use some symmetrical discard spells to reanimate our creatures from the graveyard. Let's begin. Let's start breaking this deck down by covering the ramp portion of our spellbook. Our deck wants to start revving up as soon as possible, so getting extra lands into play is a great strategy to run with early game. Since we are in Grixis colors, we don't have access to very effective ramp, but we do have some ways of getting our mana rolling and online. Solemn Simulacrum is a double hitter in this deck. He'll snag us a basic land from our library when he enters the battlefield, and he draws us a card when he dies. Dragonlord's Servant doesn't necessarily ramp us, but he lessens the cost of our dragon spells by 1 mana. Dragon Speaker Shaman does a similar thing, but lessens the cost of dragons by 2. Chromatic Lantern allows all of our lands to tap for 1 mana of any color, and it itself can tap for a color as well. Commander Sphere is great early game for getting us the colors that we need, and we no longer need it, we can sacrifice it to draw a card. Remember to tap it before sacrificing it to make sure you maximize that mana production. Darksteel Ingot is an indestructible mana rock and is good to evade artifact removal. Dimir, Izzet, and Rakdos Signets each can trade in 1 mana of any color for 2 mana in the appropriate guild combination. Gem of Becoming is a flavor win for a Nicol Bolas deck, and if we pay 3 mana, tap it and sack it, we can search for a swamp, an island, and a mountain, and add those cards to our hand. Please note that these cards do not have to be basic lands, so we can go for our non-basic lands with this card. Gilded Lotus is a mana rock that taps for 3 mana of any color. Obelisk of Grixis is a basic mana rock in our colors, and Thran Dynamo gets us 3 colorless mana. We run a number of cards that'll take advantage of our discard abilities, so let's go through those first, and then we will discuss the cards that'll force opponents to discard. The classics of Liliana's Caress and Megrim each burn opponents for 2 life for each card that they discard. This pair is joined by a newcomer, Raider's Wake, which does the same thing, but it also has the raid mechanic, which will make it a target opponent discard a card if we attacked with the creature this turn. Waste Not is perhaps the most useful of these cards, giving us different benefits whenever opponents discard cards. If they discard creature cards, we get a 2/2 black zombie creature token. If they discard a land, we'll get 2 black mana. And if they discard any other kind of card, we'll draw a card. So, should we force them to discard their hands, we will get a ton of benefits from this card. Geth's Grimoire is a useful artifact that lets us draw a card whenever an opponent discards a card. Now let's look at the cards to force our opponents to discard. Painful Quandary is a brutal enchantment that'll force opponents to either discard a card or take 5 damage whenever they cast a spell. This is particularly effective when we start building up some of the aforementioned punish cards, as losing 5 life can quickly become the better option. The Eldest Reborn is a potent control method to stop our opponent's resources. This saga forces opponents to sacrifice a creature or planeswalker with its first chapter. At its second chapter, they have to discard a card. And thirdly, at the final chapter, we can reanimate a creature or planeswalker to the battlefield under our control. Croesus the Purger is another commander option should you not want to run Bolas. The 6/6 dragon allows us to pay 2 and a black whenever it deals combat damage to opponent, and if we do, we choose a color and that target player reveals their hand and discards all cards of that color. This can be particularly devastating against a monocolored deck or a deck running heavy control, as forcing them to drop all their blue cards can ruin a great deal of their game plan. Dragon Mage might be a little too top heavy on our curve, but its effect cannot be underestimated in this deck. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, each player discards their hand and draws 7 new cards. This is very effective at disrupting opponent game plans, as they cannot get comfortable with their hands while this is in play. Jace's Archivist is working for Bolas here, ironically, letting us pay a blue mana to have all players discard their hands, and then draw equal to the greatest amount of cards that a player discarded this way. Again, wheel effects such as this can be great for our deck, as we are wanting to get our dragons in the graveyard so we can get them back later. This is done all the while denying our opponents of their precious hands. Awaken the Urwile is a potent sorcery that forces every player to dump their hands. Then, they create 2/2 zombies equal to the number of cards that they discarded. And while this does give our opponents a good amount of zombies, depending on what point of the game this hits the field, those zombies are likely not going to be as good of a compensation as whatever the cards were that were discarded. Cruel Ultimatum is another flavor win for Bolas, forcing a target player to sacrifice a creature, discard 3 cards, and lose 5 life. We then do the opposite. We return a creature from our graveyard to our hand, we draw 3 cards, and gain 5 life. This is always effective to target the lead player with this, as a very appropriate humbling maneuver. This is also the most mana-intensive costed card in the entire deck, so do be sure you have the correct color requirements before going to cast it. Dark Deal wheels everyone, except that they draw 1 less card than the number they each discarded. Siphon Mind is card draw and discard in 1, each opponent discards a card, and then we draw a card for each one discarded. Windfall has the same ability as Jace's Archivist, except it's on a sorcery. Now, I did mention that we do run some dragon cards in this deck. While many of these don't quite synergize with the rest of the deck, it is useful to dump them into the graveyard to bring back to our hand or to the battlefield later on. This is also a way to offset the rather high mana cost that a lot of dragons carry. Bladewing the Risen is a dragon with a Reanimator ability tacked on. We can also dump excess black and red mana into pumping our dragons. Boneyard Scourge can return itself to the battlefield whenever a dragon we control dies, so if one of our dragons happens to get taken out, if this is in our graveyard, we have a backup plan. The Deathbringer Regent has a board wipe on it, where if there are 5 or more other creatures in play, every other creature is destroyed, leaving you with the only creature, and it's a dragon. Kokusho the Evening Star is perhaps the best dragon for a Reanimator strategy, sapping 5 life from each opponent whenever it dies, and we get that life. We can use our suite of reanimation abilities to keep using Kokusho's ability over and over until our opponents are dead. Colligan is a great powerhouse in this deck, and if we wanted to remove the blue spells from the deck, it would make a great option as a commander for this deck. Whenever a dragon we control attacks, all creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. So if we have multiple dragons attacking, we will get multiple triggers off of this card. We can also pay its dash cost to drop it into play just for the turn, but it will gain haste. This is very good to use in a pinch when we need to get that extra power boost and maybe make sure that Colligan's swinging as well. Silumgar, the Drifting Death, has a similar ability in that each dragon that attacks will trigger its ability, but instead of buffing our dragons, Silumgar gives -1/-1 to each creature the defending player controls. So this can potentially wipe out an entire opponent's board if we swing with a large enough army of dragons. Skyline Despot is an interesting include that I wanted to mention. When it enters the battlefield, you become the Monarch. And at the beginning of the upkeep, if we are the Monarch, we create a 5/5 flying red dragon. The Monarchy is a unique mechanic that I love to explore in Commander whenever I can, as once we become the Monarch, we remain the Monarch until an opponent's creature deals combat damage to us, and then that creature's controller becomes the Monarch. At the beginning of the end phase, the Monarch gets to draw a card. This is a fun twist on Commander games, which, given the power that we glean from being a Monarch, made me choose to include the Despot. Steel Hellkite is good to wipe out some pesky permanents from our opponents. The activation of this ability is a little bit tricky, as the Hellkite had to have dealt damage this turn to an opponent, but it's a nice way to kick the opponent while they're down. Lastly, the Utvara Hellkite is almost the standard to include dragon, letting us get a 6/6 flying dragon for each attacking dragon. This can put a ton of power on the board, and it gives us some good backup defenders even after we attack. So now that we've established the frameworks of this deck, let's talk win conditions. The most simple way to go about this is simply to drop as many big dragons into play and then smash face. Dragons are among the largest of creatures in Magic, outclassed by only a few creature types like Leviathans or Eldrazi. But how else can we close out a game? The next easiest way is to simply drain out opponents. The discard punishments of Megrim and Liliana's Caress, combined with the many discard outlets we run, can eventually drain them down to 0. Each card they discard with just one of these will deal 2 damage, and we can easily make them fly through 20 cards or more with our wheels and discard effects. Cards like Painful Quandary can force opponents into corners where they either have to hold off playing their spells or lose a lot of life. This can result in a severe gap in life totals between us and the rest of the table, and will make quick work for the rest of our dragons. The third and perhaps the most obscure method that we have in the deck is through mill. I included a small subset of mill-oriented cards for this deck to take advantage of the resource denial we're already enjoying. The most efficient is through the combo of Mindcrank and the Descomantle Guildmage. We only need to deal 1 damage to an opponent to completely drain them while having this combo in play. The Descomantle Guildmage will burn opponents every time they mill a card, and then the Mindcrank will mill the opponent whenever they lose life, causing the two to loop until the player's life total hits 0 or their library runs out. Mind Grind is also in this deck and is a very useful card to sink mana into, forcing opponents to mill until they hit X lands, which, depending on how much we pay into X, can be devastating. We can also punish opponents who have hefty graves with cards like Guilt Feeder, who burns opponents for each card in their graveyard. This unsuspecting creature might not seem to be worth blocking, but should it go unblocked, your opponent can be in for some hefty damage, taking 1 life for each card in their graveyard. Having abilities such as Torment of Hailfire or other stack-style cards will make it so that opponents have to make the difficult decisions what to keep, what to lose, and how much life they're willing to part with in order to keep their board state intact, especially when facing down some beefy dragons. This is a challenge that more often than not we will come up on top. One of the most important aspects of any Commander deck is the card draw engine. We can't keep the pressure on if we run out of cards in hand, so we will want to have ways to refill our answers. Dragon Mage lets us draw 7 cards after we've discarded the cards in our hand whenever it connects with an opponent. Jace's Archivist lets us draw whatever the greatest number of cards discarded by its effect is, potentially giving us a larger hand to work with. Skyline Despot makes us the Monarch, which, so long as we remain the Monarch, we'll draw a card at each one of our end steps. Solemn Simulacrum draws us a card whenever it dies. Cruel Ultimatum will draw us 3 cards, along with some other beefy benefits. Dark Deal will rebuild all hands -1 as a variation of our traditional wheel effect. Read the Bones, it lets us scry 2 before we draw 2 and lose 2 life. This can be great to rinse away some dead straws off the top of our library. Siphon Mine lets us draw a card for each card discarded after we force each other player to discard a card. Windfall lets us cycle our hands and start with whatever the greatest number of cards discarded was. Commander Sphere can be sacked to draw a card, but don't forget to tap it for mana before you do to maximize its value. Gas Grimoire lets us draw a card whenever an opponent discards a card, so we can draw a ton of cards off of this one little artifact. Fact or Fiction lets us dig 5 deep on top of our library, then let an opponent separate those cards into 2 piles. One goes to our hand, the other to the graveyard. Either way, because we run some Reanimator spells, we can revive some of the discarded cards later anyway. So with Nicol Bolas, we want to work on denying our opponents of their cards in hand, working down whatever board state they build up in the process, and controlling just how much they have to work with. Since we will be discarding and sending cards packing as well, we have Reanimator cards in the deck like the Felden of the Third Path, Beacon of Unrest, Dimir Doppelganger, Boneyard Scourge, and the Champion of Souls to get our dragons back into play. Cheating mana costs is one of the strongest abilities in Magic, and having it in such a powerful suite of creatures can open the doors to some explosive turns. We often will keep Bolas in creature form while we set up, getting value off of his being a flying 4/4 dragon, but should we need additional card draw or a giant bolt to nix off a creature, we can flip him. The remainder of our strategy will focus on putting pressure on our opponents to keep up while our flying lizards come swooping in. So now that we've covered the spellbook portion of this deck, it's time to go through the most important aspect of the deck, the mana base. We can't play our spells without our mana, so building a base that can support our dependency is crucial. We're in Grixis colors, so black, red, and blue mana is what's on the menu today. I'm not a big fan of the original dual lands and commanders, so the shock lands will definitely work fine here. Watery Grave, Blood Crypt, and Steam Vents will give us the colors that we need with the basic land types that could be searched out with our mana fixing cards. Croesus' Catacombs is the only Karoo land that we run here, coming in untapped after we bounce another non-layered land we control. This is great to fix your mana immediately. Crumbling Necropolis is one of the few land cards that we run that has to enter the play tapped. This gives us all 3 of our colors. Urborg turns every land into a swamp, letting any of our lands tap for black mana. Arcane lands Underground River, Shivan Reef, and Sulphurous Springs each let us tap for a colorless or for one of 2 colors for 1 life. Crucible of the Spirit Dragon and Haven of the Spirit Dragon both offer us some important benefits for our dragon spells. While this deck does not exactly run Cavern of Souls, only due to its cost, you're more than welcome to include it as well for your build, but these cards all will benefit having the dragon spells in your library. The Filter lands, Graven Cairns and Cascade Bluffs both let us turn our mana into whatever combination of 2 colors we need. Luxury Suite, Morphic Pool both come in untapped so long as we have 2 or more opponents. Given Commander is a multiplayer format, more often than not you will have the conditions to have these lands enter untapped. Crypt of Agadeem lets us generate a black mana for each black creature in our graveyard. Lastly, Gaia Reach Sanitarium works into the strategy lovely by giving us a discard engine on a land. That's going to wrap up this video. Are you a fan of Nicol Bolas the Ravager? Let's discuss this deck further in the comments section below. Who's your favorite commander? Let me know and maybe you'll see them in an upcoming video. You can support this channel by subscribing and ringing that bell icon, liking and sharing our videos, or even helping out over at our Patreon. You can also grab yourself a sweet Planeswalker Project playmat over at Ink Gaming. I really appreciate your time hanging out with me discussing this sweet deck. Y'all rock, and as always, I'll catch you guys, gals, and NB pals next video.